Welcome to the dark world of scary stories. A place where every sound is a premonition of the unknown, and every shadow is a step into another dimension. If you're ready to open the door to the scariest secrets, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell, because the scariest is yet to come. Turn on the light and let's beg. Bloody night in Texas. The sky over Texas felt heavy, as if it were pressing down on the earth, foreboding something sinister. The wind stirred up dust, spinning it into a vortex before casting it into the darkness that swallowed the space between scattered cabins. Deep in the heart of Texas, where roads dissolved into endless fields, stood an old motel, the Red Coyote. Jack Bennett, a young traveler on his way from Austin to El Paso, stopped there only for the night. He didn't like small towns, especially those that seemed forgotten by both God and man, but the night had caught him on the road. The motel's neon sign flickered red, as if breathing, and the door creaked when he stepped inside. The old motel owner, a gaunt man with sharp facial features, stared at Jack a little longer than necessary. His eyes gleamed with an odd light. Just for one night? His voice was dry, like cracked earth. Yeah, Jack replied, pulling out his wallet. Don't go outside at night, boy. Can be dangerous. Jack smiled, but something in the man's tone sent an unpleasant chill down his spine. He took the key and walked to his room. As the door closed behind him, a suffocating silence filled the space. Sleep wouldn't come. Somewhere beyond the wall, something scratched faintly, like a rat searching for a way out. Jack sighed and got up, walking over to the window. He gazed at the deserted road disappearing into the darkness. Then, in the dim glow of a street lamp, he saw something, a dark figure standing in the field. It wasn't moving. Jack rubbed his eyes, but the figure remained. Worse still, it seemed to be getting closer. He stepped back from the window, listening. The wind howled, whispering his name. A sudden, sharp knock on the door. Who's there? Jack's voice trembled. Silence. Another knock, louder this time. Cautiously, he approached, placing his hand on the doorknob. But before he could turn it, the door creaked open on its own. A girl stood before him. She was barefoot, her feet covered in dust, her white dress stained with something dark. Her eyes were black, devoid of pupils, empty as a deep well. You're late, she whispered, her lips curling into a terrifying smile. Something cold struck Jack's chest, throwing him backward against the wall. The girl stepped forward, her body moving in multiple directions at once, as if unseen hands were tearing her apart. Suddenly, the room's light flickered and went out. In the darkness, Jack heard voices, whispering, murmuring, crying, laughing. The walls seemed to close in, shrinking the space, and amidst the chaos, he felt the icy touch of fingers wrapping around his throat. He screamed. By morning, the motel owner stood silently before room 6. The door was ajar. Inside, no one. Only a large, dried bloodstain remained on the floor. That's the second one this month, he muttered quietly and shut the door. Motel owner old Sam Graves shut the door, wiped his hands on his greasy apron, and slowly walked back to the front desk. He knew the sheriff would arrive soon, just as he had many times before. Every month or two, someone stopped here for the night, and then vanished without a trace. Sheriff Tom Lawson arrived an hour later. He knew this place too well. Stepping out of his old pickup, he slowly made his way toward the motel. Sam again? His voice was tired, as if he already knew the answer. Yeah, room 6, Sam replied curtly, leaning on the counter. The sheriff stepped cautiously into the room. The air was thick, reeking of something rotten and metallic. He glanced at the bloodstain on the floor. It hadn't fully dried yet. But the worst part was the message on the wall. Right above the bed in large black letters were the words, "They're back." Lawson inhaled sharply and looked around. No signs of struggle as usual? He asked, though he knew the answer. Sam nodded silently. Every night, there are sounds, he muttered. Whispers, knocking at the door, and then, silence. And by morning, someone's gone. Lawson clenched his jaw. He had long suspected that something was wrong with this motel. His father, the previous sheriff, had told him stories of people disappearing around here. But no one wanted to speak about what they all feared to even think. The butchers of the Red Coyote. 1956 back then, the motel was brand new, run by the Clayton family, a husband, a wife, and their 2 sons. No one suspected that they weren't just simple motel owners. They lived for murder. Travelers who stopped here for the night never made it to morning. They were bludgeoned with hammers, strangled with ropes, and cut open with knives. Their flesh was then mixed with beef and sold at the roadside diner. People disappeared. The police investigated. But no evidence was ever found. Until one night, everything changed. A man named John Hudson checked into the motel. But he wasn't just another traveler. He was searching for his sister, who had vanished here a week earlier. John wasn't a fool. He sensed danger the moment he walked in. He didn't sleep, he waited. And when, in the middle of the night, his door began to slowly creak open, he was ready. When the younger Clayton's son lunged at him with a knife, John grabbed his attacker's wrist and drove the blade into the boy's throat. Then, all hell broke loose. John ran into the hallway and saw the motel owner, covered in blood, staggering toward him with a cleaver. His wife stood at the other end of the corridor, moaning like an animal. John backed away, until he realized there was no way out. He grabbed a lantern and hurled it into a gas canister. Flames erupted. The building caught fire. The people inside burned, screaming, but no one ran out. By the time the police arrived, all that remained of the motel were charred ruins. Everyone assumed the Claytons had perished in the fire. But only 3 bodies were found. The 4th, the elder Clayton's son, was missing. And that's when the disappearances began. "Sam," the sheriff muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead, "this place needs to be shut down." Sam gave a bitter smile. "Shut it down? You think that'll change anything?" Lawson looked at him, and for the first time, there was fear in his eyes. "They're back," Sam whispered. At that moment, the motel lights flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed them. And from the corridor, a cold whisper echoed. "You're late," the whisper echoed down the corridor, crawling along the walls as if the air itself had come alive. Lawson drew his revolver, took off the safety, and stepped forward cautiously. "Sam, if this is some cheap trick to scare me," he grumbled, "then congratulations. You've already succeeded." Sam didn't answer. He stood behind the counter, his eyes wide open, staring into the darkness ahead. Suddenly, from the far end of the hallway, a sharp sound broke the silence, like fingernails scraping against wooden floors. A cold sweat ran down the sheriff's spine. "Who's there?" he called out, raising his gun. The darkness didn't answer. But it moved. Slowly, as if seeping out of the night itself, a figure began to take shape. First, Lawson saw the feet, bare, covered in dried blood. Then the thin body, wrapped in a filthy shirt that had once been white. And finally, the face. The creature's eyes were black voids, swallowing the light. Its mouth stretched into a grotesque, unnatural grin. "You're late," it whispered. Lawson didn't hesitate. He fired. The gunshot echoed through the motel, but the figure didn't disappear. It staggered back but continued forward a moment later. "God!" the sheriff muttered, stepping away. Sam finally spoke, his voice dry and strained. "You can't kill him, Tom, he's not from this world." Lawson turned to run. But the door, it was gone. Where the old wooden exit had been just seconds ago, there was now only a solid, endless black wall. This can't be real," Lawson breathed, his chest tightening. Sam slowly lifted his head. His eyes trembled with fear. "They've taken this motel," he whispered. "We're not in our world anymore." And then, the hallway began to change. The walls trembled as if alive, blood slowly seeping through the peeling wallpaper. Voices whispered from the darkness, calling, laughing, crying. Lawson felt an invisible force tightening around his body. And then, a horrifying realization struck him. This wasn't a motel anymore. It was a trap. It was their world. The darkness swallowed him whole. A truck rumbled past the road where the motel once stood. The driver, an older man with a graying beard, glanced toward the lot and slowed down. He frowned. The motel was gone. Only an overgrown, empty field remained, a place where nothing had been built for decades. Shaking his head, the man drove on, never knowing that those who stepped into that motel never returned. The wind stirred dust on the empty plot of land where the Red Coyote Motel had once stood. But though the building was gone, something remained. An invisible, but palpable, thick and heavy scent of death. Somewhere in the darkness, Sheriff Lawson lay on the floor, breathing heavily. He didn't know how much time had passed. A day, an hour, an eternity. Around him, there was nothing but blackness. But when he tried to rise, his hands touched wooden floorboards. He was still in the motel. Sam. His voice sounded strange, muffled. Something moved ahead. You have to run, the familiar voice whispered. Lawson tried to get up, but his body wouldn't obey. It felt as though something invisible was holding him in place. They see you, Sheriff, Sam's voice echoed from all directions. Lawson gritted his teeth. Who are they, damn it? And then the light flared. No, it wasn't an electric light. It was a dirty yellow, ominous fire, spilling from the walls, revealing what had been hidden in the shadows. Creatures. Tall, thin figures with twisted faces. Their skin was torn, as though it had been peeled off and sewn back on. Their mouths were stretched into eternal grins, and their hands, long, thin, with fingers sharp as razors. They stood silently, watching. Lawson felt his heart nearly leap out of his chest. And then one of the figures spoke. Its voice was distorted, like the echo of dozens of voices speaking at once. You will stay with us. Lawson raised his pistol and fired. But the bullet passed right through, causing no harm. The shadow came closer. Its cold fingers touched his neck, and in that instant, Lawson saw everything. Every murder. Every scream. Every victim they had claimed over the decades. He no longer screamed. He only whispered, like all those they had consumed before him. An old gas station by Highway 44. Van driver Ray Calder stopped to have some coffee before hitting the road. The cafe was quiet, save for the radio playing old country songs. He sat by the window and looked out at the empty field across the road. And then he saw the motel. Old, with peeling walls, the sign Red Coyote flickering red once again. He shrugged. Strange. It wasn't here before, he muttered to himself. And then he saw the window of one of the rooms open. From the darkness of the room, black, empty eyes stared at him. And smiled. Ray Calder jerked his gaze away from the motel window and rubbed his eyes. His heart pounded in his chest, and a chill ran down his spine. What the hell? He looked again. The motel was there, just like before, but now the window was shut. No one inside. Just the old peeling building illuminated by a strange yellow light. Ray shook his head, took a sip of his coffee, and sighed. This is nonsense, he muttered. But something inside him whispered, Ray, get out of here. Right now. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed the dispatcher's number. Hey Joe, I'm here on Route 44, by the old gas station. There's some motel here. Was it always here? A few seconds of silence followed, and then the dispatcher's hoarse voice responded, Ray, you must be mistaken. There's no motel there. Ray clenched the phone tighter. No, Joe. I see it. It's right in front of me. Listen, buddy, the dispatcher's voice sounded worried. There's never been a motel there. It's been an empty lot for 50 years. Ray slowly set the phone down on the table. His throat had gone dry. He looked up at the motel again. Now, the entrance doors were wide open, and on the porch stood a man in a police uniform. Sheriff Tom Lawson. Lawson didn't remember how he ended up there. He had been in the darkness. He had seen their faces. He knew they had taken him. But now he stood before the motel, and the wind ruffled his cap. He turned and saw the truck at the gas station, and the driver inside the cafe. The next victim. It's time, the voice whispered behind him. Lawson didn't turn around. He knew who it was. He knew that now, he belonged to them. Now, he was a hunter too. Ray watched as the sheriff in uniform slowly moved toward him. His movements were not quite right. He walked stiffly, but every step was too sharp, too loud. And then, when the sheriff lifted his head, Ray saw his eyes. They were black. Empty. Ray felt an icy terror grip his body. He quickly pulled money from his pocket, threw it on the table, and rushed for the exit. He no longer thought. He just ran. To his van. To the road. But when he grabbed the door handle, he saw his reflection in the window. And behind his shoulder, a silhouette. Black eyes. A smile. Darkness. That night, an abandoned van was found on Route 44. The doors were open, and a phone sat on the seat, still working. No signs of a struggle. No blood. Just barefoot footprints leading to the empty lot where the motel once stood. And some say that if you drive this road at night, you can see the red neon light of the sign. Red Coyote. The door is always open. But no one ever comes out. And so, as darkness once again envelopes you, we say goodbye, but not for long. Remember, the night is never truly safe. Subscribe so you don't miss the new horrors, and come back when it's time for new nightmares. Beware of the shadows. They are always near. Until next time.